Chodesh Tov Rabotai. We're continuing with our Mishna Yomi Masechet Terumot. We're up to Perek Daled Mishnah Hey. Today's Mishnah should be Leilu Nishmat Neria ben Svetlana Aranbayev and Eliyahu ben Bracha Israelov Minuchatam Began Eden. Amen. The previous two Mishnot that we learned focused on the minimum amount that can be given as Terumah. Today our Mishnah is going to present a three-way dispute, a three-way machloket as to the maximum amount that can be given as Terumah. The Mishnah says, Amarbeh bitrumah. If one wants to separate more terumah than necessary from his pile of produce, Rabbi Eliezer says, Echad me'asara, he can designate a maximum of 1 part in 10 as terumah, 10th. Ki terumat maaser, just like we find a different type of terumah, namely terumat maaser is 1/10 of the maaser. Yater mikan, if he designated more than this amount, meaning more than 1/10, in which case now this designated portion contains 2 parts, the 1/10 itself, which is terumah, and the extra part, which is tevel. Ya'asena terumat maaser lamakom acher. We're going to see why, but the Mishnah says he should make the extra part now terumat maaser for produce that is in another place, and give the entire portion that he separated to a kohen. And the Mefarshim explain the amount that is above the 1/10 limit for terumah is tevel, just like the remainder of the pile. Although it's no longer obligated in terumah, because terumah has already been separated, has been designated for the whole pile, maasrot must still be designated for it. Now in theory, he could remove the tevel status of the extra amount by designating other produce as maasrot for it, or by designating the amount itself as maaser. However, the extra amount would still be forbidden to a non-kohen, because it's mixed together with the 1/10 of terumah. And we do not know which part of the mixture is terumah and which part is chulin, non-tevel produce. The owner, therefore, the Mishnah advises him to make the extra amount terumat maaser, which anyway can only be eaten by the kohen, and then give the entire mixture to a kohen. Of course, the mefarshim add terumat maaser can be designated only for maaser rishon. Therefore, the owner must first designate maaser rishon for his produce, making sure to include the extra amount in the maaser rishon, and then he can designate the entire extra amount as the terumat maaser for the maaser rishon. The Tana of this Mishnah obviously is following the opinion that Israel can separate terumat maaser from his maaser rishon, and that it's not necessary for a Levi to do it. The next Tana holds that the maximum amount for terumah is higher. Rabbi Yishmael says, Mechza chulin umechza terumah. A person can separate terumah up to the point where the pile is half chulin and half terumah, meaning the maximum you can separate is half. And the Mefarshim explain, Rabbi Yishmael learns this from a pasuk in Sefer Dvarim, chapter 18, pasuk 4, which calls terumah reshit ganecha, the first of your grain. Rabbi Yishmael understands that the pasuk is trying to equate the terumah portion, which is the first, to the remaining portion, which is your grain. Therefore, terumah can be no larger than the amount of produce that remains after the terumah has been separated, meaning the terumah cannot exceed half of all the produce. And the final view raises the limit even higher. Rabbi Tarfon and Rabbi Akiva omrim, Rabbi Tarfon and Rabbi Akiva say, Ad she'isher sham chulin, one can designate as much terumah as he wishes, provided that he leaves some chulin there in the pile. And the Mefarshim explain, Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Tarfon understand the phrase Reshit Ganecha, the first of your grain, to mean that some distinction must be made between the terumah, the first, and the remaining produce, the grain. This means, the Rav explains, that in practice you can designate as much terumah as you want, provided that at least some small amount of produce remains. And the Rav tells us, V'alakha Rabbi Tarfon v'Rabbi Akiva, the halakha follows the opinion of Rabbi Tarfon and Rabbi Akiva, that you can designate as much terumah as you want, provided that you leave some chulin there in the pile. That is in Rabotai Mishnah Hey. Mishnah Vav now, just to give a brief introduction that I see from the Art Scroll Elucidated, we learned in chapter 1, Mishnah 7, that the amount of terumah to be separated must be determined by estimation. It cannot be exact. However, when separating maaser and terumat maaser, for which the Torah gives a fixed amount, 1/10, it's preferable to avoid estimation and to use exact methods of measurement instead. Terumah, we say do estimation, but maaser and terumat maaser, which the Torah says has to be 1/10, you should avoid estimation, use exact measurements instead. Therefore, before separating maaser, the owner should measure exactly how much produce he has, so that he can designate precisely 1/10 as maaser. This Mishnah is going to begin by discussing a particular method for calculating how many fruits is separated as maaser. One first counts fruits one by one into a basket until it's full, so that he knows the number of fruits the basket holds. Then every time he fills up the basket, he separates 1/10 of that number as maaser. However, the Mefarshim explain this method is not entirely reliable because the sun dries the fruits more. The sun dries the fruits through the summer, making them smaller. Therefore, the basket can hold more fruits, and therefore you have to separate a larger number of fruits from maaser than he did at first. So the Mishnah now is going to teach us how to deal with this problem. Bishlosha prakim misha'arim et hakalkala. At 3 stages during the summer, one assesses how many fruits the basket can hold. Babakurot, at the time of the early fruits, when they are at their largest and the basket holds the smallest number. Uvasiyafot, at the time of the late fruits, when they're at their smallest and the basket holds the largest number. Ube'emtza ha'kayitz, and at midsummer, when they are of medium size and the basket holds the medium number. For example, the Mefarshim explain, let's say you measure the basket at the beginning of the season and you see that it holds 100 fruits. From then until midsummer, you can assume that each basket is 100 fruits and you separate 10 fruits from each basketful as maaser. At midsummer, he measures the basket again and he sees that it holds 110. So from that point until near the end of the harvest season, he separates 11 fruits from each basketful as maaser. Towards the end of the harvest season, he measures the basket for the last time and he sees that it can hold 150 fruits. So from then until the very end of the harvest, he separates 15 fruits from each basketful as maaser. That's how the Rambam in his comment to the Mishnah explains it. The Mishnah now rates various methods that can be used to calculate how much produce a person has so that he can know how much to designate as maaserot. Hamoneh mishubach, one who counts his fruits is more praiseworthy than one who uses estimation. Estimation is not as praiseworthy as counting, but it's allowed. Vamoded mishubach mimen, and one who measures their volume is more praiseworthy than the one that counts the fruits. Why? Because measuring is a more exact method of calculation than counting. And the Mefarshim explained, counting, for example, 100 figs and then setting aside 10 as maaser does not take into account the slight differences in the sizes of individual figs. In contrast, if you measure their total volume, for example, you measure 50 se'ah and separate 5 se'ah as maaser, the differences between individual fruits are not significant. Vashokel mishubach mishloshtan, and one who weighs his fruits is more praiseworthy than the three of them. Why? Because weighing is the most exact method of all. The Mefarshim explain even measuring the volume is flawed because it doesn't take into account the spaces between individual fruits. Weighing, however, is not affected by the spaces, and therefore the Mishnah says weighing the fruits is the most praiseworthy method out of all 3 of them, because it's the most exact method of all. That is, Rabotai, today's Mishna Yomi. Baruch Adonai Leolam, Amen v'Amen.